I was putting off saying anything because I have not had the opportunity to either simulate this idea or build a physical device, so it's purely speculative in the sense that I'm using my imagination to modify some prior speculations that I have had about Nathan Stubblefield's battery, what is missing from the patent. So what my current speculation is that the bolt, the core of, no, excuse me, not the core, the iron winding. The iron winding is connected, it's basically an electrostatic device. All of his system is electrostatic in nature, and the reason why he failed to produce results in New York City was because all of the ground currents were messing up, were depleting the voltage potentials that he was trying to make use of. So his device does not expend energy as its input, and yet it gives results. It gives light and heat without expending watts, which is a perfectly marvelous system when you think about it. And a motion detector, again, without expenditure of watts. I mean, this is the whole beauty of electrostatic systems that we don't make use of because you can't charge money for a lack of expenditure of energy. You have to justify charging somebody money that they've consumed watts. But an electrostatic system doesn't consume anything. It's just potential that it runs off of. So it's, what do you call that? Is that free energy? I don't, it's not energy, so it's whether it's free or not. Anyway, so because he had two polished plates that were giving off heat, he had successfully ionized the air above the ground level, so that light was coming from everywhere, from the air molecules, from all directions, a diffuse light that was very bright as the noonday sun. And all of his arc lanterns were not working anymore. He wasn't making use of them because he didn't need to. As far as his motion detector system, that was a prior, might have been a prior point in the calendar in the chronology of the development of his technology. In any case, so I can't comment, but in any case, this is the state of affairs. They found him dead in his, locked from the inside in his cabin, was that at nighttime the light, the airspace was lit up very bright, and I guess similar to Aurora Borealis, I guess, in functionality. I don't know, by comparison. And he had two polished metal plates that were spaced a certain distance apart that were emitting a nice, cozy warmth in his cabin, and he was emaciated and basically starved to death. And I suspect there was a third element going on. Besides heat and light, there was the bliss element. The bliss put out by such an electrical system because it was totally compatible with living systems. Our system is not. You put your fingers in the socket and you'll get electrocuted. Or linemen working on, they have to take precautionary measures when working on a transmission line. But his system was totally working with nature, not contrary to nature, and so it probably emitted a blissful sensation that was so engaging and that he was so wrapped up in that he just forgot to eat. He just laid there in bed weak, but totally mesmerized by how he felt. Because I'm projecting here, obviously, but I know what I'm speaking of. I've already gone through that experience that I'm describing, and of course it's nihilistic because you can't maintain your physical existence when that happens, and consequently, if your device should happen to break down and require repair, you don't feel like repairing it. That was the condition I was in when I was experiencing samadhi for 2.5 hours, using a modification, or the application, I should say, of Eric Dollar's analog computer in LMD mode, longitudinal magnetodielectric modality, 3 modules in series, connected to Leon Ernest Ammann's biocircuit, and I got into it, connected it to my body, all using all eight chakras, not only 4, because Leon didn't think you had to use all 8, but I used all 8. The 2 wrists, the 2 ankles, the throat, the crotch. What is that? That's only 6. Is that only 6? Oh, and the 2 ears. Right, the 2 ears. 2 ears, 2 feet, 2 ankles, 2 wrists, 2 ears, a throat, and crotch. So that makes 8 chakra points. A couple of which are already recognized in Eastern mysticism, namely the throat and the crotch, but the other 6 are not recognized, but they are. They are energy vortexes, points of interest. Anywho, so it broke down right, when I caught up on my sleep, which was suppressed dream, deep sleep like a hibernating animal. So I had to do it in the daytime because most of us, not all of us, most of us need to dream at night. Not when we're fasting, though. An extended fast. Like 2 years on fruits and vegetables, finished off with a grape diet of 10 weeks. I didn't dream. But then I was starting to witness, so I was starting to become, enlightened. Experience it momentarily for a few months before and after. Anyway, so my thinking now about his device is that the copper winding is shorted to itself. And this fulfills the condition described by Eric Dollard in one of his talks, that this man in the audience asked the question, if you have a toroid core, an toroidal iron core with a copper coil on it, you're submitting energy to that coil, and then you have another copper coil that is just a loop, a single loop of copper wire that goes through the center of that toroid. That copper wire will heat up so bad it'll get very, very hot. And Eric said, well, you're doing everything right. I mean, the magnetism wants to form self-looping rings, and you've given it... See, the magnetism normally wants to go into the interior of the iron, but now you've caused it to go into the interior of the copper, and it's now manifesting as current. The magnetism, what would have been the magnetism on the inside of the toroidal core, which may be there anyway, but in any case. So I think if you short out the insulated copper winding of Nathan Stubblefield's Earth battery patent to itself, it now fulfills that condition, because the iron winding around the iron bolt is... That iron winding is... So the bolt, my theory now is that the bolt, you leave it alone. Okay, we simply have the iron winding, the bare iron winding, and the insulated copper winding surrounding it. And the copper winding is self-shorted, and the iron winding, one end is connected to a diode, a borax diode or a baking soda diode. And the other electrode of that diode, of course, is aluminum, and that goes to an aluminum aerial. And that provides the DC voltage input, very low power, but sufficient to prevent leakage because we're providing the voltage, and from a natural source, namely the Earth. What is it, a microvolt? But it's probably oscillating, right? Because we've got all kinds of natural frequencies along with man-made frequencies that can be picked up by a crystal radio set, even though the wattage of, the voltage of those frequencies is merely a few microvolts, 2 or 3, I believe, or up to 5 maximum, I think, at ground level. So it's enough to infuse the iron bolt and all of the iron windings adjacent to the copper winding with a DC voltage or a DC potential that is going in one direction, and it won't be microvolts because you're accumulating potential on each half cycle of oscillations that are being pumped into it from the Earth and from the atmosphere at ground level. So when it's released upon the second or the alternating half of each cycle of oscillation, it's going to be something greater than the ambient background of microvolts in the environment. I don't know what, but it'll be greater. It'll be a kind of a pulsing situation, I guess you could say. In any case, that's the DC input that I imagine at this point. It goes into the iron winding, and the copper insulated has to be self-shorted. Now that makes one other thing required, and that is the load coil. The load coil in his patent sits on top of these other windings, at the top end of the bolt. I believe, I see my memory doesn't serve me, it does ring around the bolt, the load coil. It's not just elevated above the terminus of the iron bolt, but is within the scope of the iron bolt. I'm guessing, I can't remember, I'm assuming. But it sits on top of the copper insulated winding that I'm assuming is self-shorted, and the iron winding that's interspersed amongst the copper winding. This load coil is very crucial that it have a load on it, and the other because I'm suspecting that when the system is designed and put together properly, it'll fry itself if a load is not on the load coil to begin with, to prevent the escalation, the ever-increasing escalation of overunity on this device. Kind of like a braking magnet on an electromechanical watt-hour meter. That braking magnet has to be there, or else the perforated aluminum disc of an electromechanical watt-hour meter would spin to ever-increasing RPM and probably dislodge itself from the jewel bearings, the bronze axle that's set into jewel bearings. Any case, so the load coil has a load on it, and the other thing I'm speculating is that the load coil is an open coil. It's not a closed coil, and this goes to a principle that Mitko Georgiev has extensively written about on Quora, and not too many people seem to believe a word he says, that you can have current in an open line. He just stipulates, well, if the line is long enough, and maybe a few other points of interest, bullet points, but the one that I remember is that the line has to be quite extensive, quite long, lengthy. Maybe two lines and one is longer than the other. I can't remember from your center point, but in any case, he did show the exhibition of current. Now, one could maybe assume that maybe the open lines are acting as capacitances, and there's ionization going on in the air interconnecting those two lines. I don't know, making it a closed loop. In any case, regardless, from an electrical connectivity point of view, as engineer, when you design and build something, if the designer, the builder, does not provide any electrical connection between the two terminals of the load coil sitting on top of Nathan Stubblefield's so-called Earth battery patent from the 1890s or 80s, I forget which decade it was, it should still work, in theory, because it's basically an electrostatic system. The whole thing is an electrostatic system, except for that one coil that's self-shorted, the copper insulated coil that goes around the bolt and is wound along with the bare iron wire as a bifilar winding. So they're wound together, and they sit adjacent to each other around the iron bolt. He shows a cross-sectional diagram in which every other wire, when you cross through it, if you cut through it vertically from top to bottom through the center of the bolt and the center of the entire contraption, it shows that every other wire is iron versus insulated copper surrounding that, the two coils that surround the bolt at the base and take up most of the length of the bolt that is being the bolt is serving as a core to his so-called transformer, which really isn't a transformer in a sense, because not in our conventional sense, in any sense, in any way, in any sense, is that the right word? In any sense, in any case. So for the most part, it's electrostatic. Now, why? Well, so the insulated copper winding surrounding at the base of the bolts, interspersed with the iron winding, that's providing a magnetic field, and it's a DC field. Well, no, it could be AC. Let's see. Wait a minute. No, no, it would have to be DC, because the iron now is the iron winding is set up with a diode, a borax diode. So it's at one end of the borax diode, and then the aluminum aerial is at the other end of that borax diode, or baking soda if you prefer. So we've got we have oscillating voltage. That's it. So we have oscillating voltage and DC current being forced onto the self-shorted insulated copper winding that's wound with the iron winding. And that's going to create a peculiar condition, because there's relatively very little resistance on that self-shorted insulated copper winding. And, it may end up becoming like a ratchet wrench, like the perpetuum mobile that... oh gosh, I'm sorry, I didn't commit to memory how to pronounce the name, so I can't remember the name. The Turkish guy who's telling me something about sanity. So it may work in a functionally similar manner, in which the current does move, because the storage of potential in the borax diode may be gradual, while the release may be sudden. If that's the case, then it should function in a similar manner and create perpetual motion in one direction, governed by the diode and imparted to the self-shorted insulated copper coil, and set up a suitable potential on the load coil, which needs to be an open coil to prevent the system from escalating to infinite oblivion and the infinite potentials of energy, voltage, amps, whatever, that would fry the darn thing. So out of the three coils, only one is closed and the other two are open. So it's a mixed open-closed system engaging all kinds of complexities that would take a vast amount of math and physics and engineering to analyze it, to really see what's going on. But that's my speculation. I've done all of this in my head, and over the course of the last several weeks, with no access to a computer, just my cell phone to record my thoughts on these podcasts, because I'm too busy surviving to be able to do anything else. I don't have access to anything. Everything's in storage. And most of my day is spent working, although today I managed to relax. So I feel in a good mood, and I decided to share with you what I thought I would not share. And I think that's why this fella from Turkey, Mother Nature prompted him to make a comment that I can't decipher the gist of it. I think he's trying to give me good advice. Maybe I'm wasting my time doing something I could better spend my energy doing elsewhere, something along those lines. But be that as it may, I thought I would share with you these thoughts on my latest speculations of Nathan Stubblefield's Earth battery. Now, there's one other twist to this line of speculative reasoning, and that is what happens when we want to invert the direction of the diode. The diode, by nature, the borax diode, one end is aluminum and the other end is something else other than aluminum, and in this case I choose iron, the iron winding that surrounds Nathan Stubblefield's iron bolt. And I'm only using one terminal of that iron winding connected to the borax diode. The other end is free. So, I didn't really pose this as a question. I'm doing this in reverse logic because what happened was it just came to me. Because I was posing a different question to myself. How would the Ammann brothers device that we do have a picture of, but only the outside of it, strapped to the front end of an electric car in 1921, how does that compare? Because I'm always trying to make comparisons between the two inventions because I want to believe that they're similar but not exactly the same. And so what I'm suspecting now, again, speculative reasoning, is that the diotic action in the Ammann brothers is inverted relative to Nathan Stubblefield's earth battery. If indeed he did have a borax diode not included in the patent connected to the iron winding. And he doesn't state also what the connections on his leads are to the three different coils. So we're left to speculate. And I've mentioned in the past, I think that's going to make all the difference. And now I have speculative input here to contribute as to what those connections are, those 6 terminals of those 3 coils. But what do we do with the question if we pose the rhetorical or hypothetical, not rhetorical, hypothetical question, how does the Earl Ammann device compare? I think it's basically the same invention with the inverted diode. The polarity of the diode is inverted. And so to do that, we still require the aluminum terminal, but instead of iron, we're using copper. And that's what the 2 copper spheres are. I suspect somehow, I'm not sure how yet, but somehow they form the terminus of either 1 or 2 diodes that are aluminum-based borax or baking soda diodes. Because a century ago, that kind of diode was not uncommon. And when Earl Ammann says there are mineral in one newspaper article, minerals plural in another instance, I'm left to wonder, what is that mineral? And it could be baking soda, because if you get trona, that's a mineral mined from the earth. It's sodium sesquicarbonate, in which case you have 2 moles of sodium ions and 1 mole each of bicarbonate versus carbonate ion, which makes the sodium sesquicarbonate molecule, the chemical, complete in its description. And that's the trona, Trona, mineral that is mined from the earth, and we infuse it with we saturate it with bicarbonations and then sell it as sodium bicarbonate in the supermarkets. In any case, that's a mineral, and it's several well, no, that's one. So if he mixed it with borax, a baking soda borax combination, then that would be plural. So I don't know. That's my speculation for what minerals are involved. He doesn't say water. Maybe it's important that he left that one out. But he did say iron, and he said wire. And there's a comma between them. So it's not iron wire necessarily. It's just iron and wire. And so the listener, the audience, is left to speculate, what does he mean by that, But we do have the image of the 2 copper spheres. And being spheres, that's a self-shorted coil, a pair of self-shorted coils, with a single open line, from all we can see, a single line coming out of each one, which, for all intents and purposes, looks like one end of an open line, because we don't see another line coming back into the sphere. So we have to assume it's an open line, unless the 2 spheres are connected by a single copper tube that we don't see the middle of, so that the 2 spheres are linked together. But that makes the tube an open line. Only the spheres are closed. So I'm not sure how that would figure in. Are they 2 separate pieces, or are they one piece? If they're one piece, then only one diode is required. If they're 2 pieces, then we need 2 diodes. But that would be the other terminal constituting the other metal, contrary to the aluminum metal of, I believe it's the anode. The aluminum, I think, is on the anode. I could have it backwards. And the cathode is the other metal, other than aluminum. And the natural oscillations of the environment might create oxidation on the aluminum, or maybe you have to force it. Maybe you have to condition these diodes before you use them, using high voltage, to get aluminum oxide to form on the aluminum electrode that is immersed in the borax solution. I don't know, this harks to like Stanley Meyer, where you have to condition the plates, or no, not that. What's it called? The Joe tubes. The Joe tubes? I think they're called Joe tubes? The Joe cell. The Joe cell, those have to be preconditioned, as I recall. But these anodes may have to be also, if I have my polarity right, of the aluminum terminal. So I'm suspecting the serial Ammann device the speculation might satisfy the question, how does it compare? It compares if we invert the polarity of the diodes, so that, because we don't see, they're dealing, the Ammann brothers are dealing with a mobile device, mobile power supply, while Nathan Stubblefield is dealing with a grounded system that's grounded to the earth. And so how do you ground a system which only has common ground? So you have to maybe invert the polarity of the diode if a diode indeed is missing from Nathan Stubblefield's invention and is included in the serial Ammann invention. That the polarity of the orientation of that diode in each case is inverted relative to each other. Because in one instance, in the Stubblefield instance, you're dealing with a earth-grounded system, and in the serial Ammann system, you're dealing with a common grounded system. So, because it's insulated from the earth because of the wheels. Whether they were wooden wheels or, I think they were insulated rubber. So anyway, though, that's as much as I have to impart to share with you. And maybe you could restate your comment about how I should better make use of my sanity, conserve my sanity. Maybe I'm wasting it. I don't understand what you mean to imply. Good, bad, neutral, I really don't know, and I don't mind, because you're a good guy and you're contributing to humanity's knowledge, so what could go wrong? I'm sure it's you have good intentions, and I just don't understand what you're saying. The words, it didn't make, the string of words didn't make any sense to me. But anyway, maybe I'll have better luck next time, or maybe I'll have better luck next time understanding your commentary. But here's my 2 cents worth in any case.